But today we're kicking off a brand new study. And so would you guys please welcome Coy as he comes up to stage.
Mitchell was talking about Oscar J. Pope and how they moved from a C school to an A school. They were actually a D school several years in a row, which means the district got involved. And this week they celebrated becoming an A school. And Lonnie's always on campus. She's there every single week asking in the office, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And they give her things to do. And last week they told Lonnie, we would love for your staff and you to come celebrate with us. So last Thursday, I think 8:30 in the morning, we went and we went to the cafeteria, and all the important district people on the school board were there. Everybody was there. The superintendent was there, and they brought in cheerleaders from Lakeland High School, which was a surprise. The cheerleaders were there, and they brought a couple football players, and because they wanted to pump them up. And one of those football players was a middle school student who went to Southwest Middle School that my daughter went to school with when she was in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and he was such an ornery middle schooler. And so when I saw him standing there, I'm like, are you the same kid that I knew in middle school? And he's like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I'm like, I'm so proud of you. But I wanted to tell you something. The assistant principal came up to me and said, she said, Coy. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, do you remember when we first met about 6 years ago, what you said to me? And I didn't really know what I said to her, but I was like, yeah, I do remember what I said to you. She's like, you told me 6 years ago that we would be in A school. And at that time, they were a D school. And they became an A school. That's not because I'm a prophet. I am not Prophet Coy. That is not my title. But I'm telling you, when people feel believed in, and they know that there's a group of people out there who are saying, we're right behind you. We're going to stay with you. We're not going to abandon you. We're going to show up for you however we can show up for you. It's not because of Somos that they did what they did. It's because they had a staff that worked really, really hard. If you're a teacher, if you work at a school, you know how much work it takes to do that. But they remember that we've been a part of it all the way through, from D to A. And so I want you to be proud of yourself, number one, but I want you to see the significance of the impact that a church like ours, just a tiny church. We're not a big church. You all know that. We're tiny. When people think about churches, they don't think about Somos Church. They think about the ones that in their church, this is like one part of their church building. But you, this little church, helped a school believe, and they went from a D to an A. That is amazing. That is so amazing. And I wish I could remember saying that to her, but I'm so glad she reminded me. I want to give a little pop quiz right now, a vocabulary pop quiz, to see if you grew up where I grew up so that you might know some of these terms. I want to give you the first term. I'm just curious if anybody knows the definition for the word golly. Anybody? Can you define the word golly? Who has heard of the word golly before? Oh, we got some hillbillies in the room. Okay, welcome hillbillies. You cannot know what a golly is if you grow up in Florida because they do not exist as far as I know. I was talking to somebody about it today, and I was trying to describe it, and they're all like a valley. I'm like, no, a gully is not a valley. A valley is big. A gully is like two hills coming down to meet in the center, and there's a creek that runs through it. And if you grew up where I grew up, like that was our playground. We loved going to the bottom of the gully and playing in the creek. It was so fun. Now, I say creek today. Where I grew up, we called it a crick. And so we would play in the gully. I just happened to be blessed by the fact that my grandma and grandpa lived at the top of the gully, and all I had to do was walk down their property to get to it. Like, we loved playing down there because we would often find vines and swing across. It was amazing. One time we were swinging across, and we were just like swinging so hard, and it was terrible, but also hilarious. I don't know why this is true when you're a kid, but one of our friends was swinging back and forth across, and he was having so much fun. He was laughing and just slipped off the vine and landed in the creek and broke his arm. And we were like, how could this happen? But man, that was so fun to watch. Another vocabulary word, let's see if you know what this is. I think you can, by context clues, tell me what this is, but can you define the word crawdad? You have crawfish in Florida. In Ohio, we had crawdads. And a funny story about that. we would go down in the creek in the gully and we'd look for them. And something in the water, I have no idea what it was, but in the water where we would look for them, they would turn like fluorescent orange. And that was the closest we could get to lobsters. Like that was it for us. Like that's what we connected it with. This is a miniature lobster in fresh water in Ohio. And so the funny story is that where we live now, here in Florida, our house has garages at the back, and there's a little creek that runs behind us all the way down to Lake Hollingsworth. And one day, one of my daughters came into the house terrified, like, "Dad." And I forget what she said, but in my memory, I think she said there's a dinosaur in the garage. And I was trying, like, what is in the garage? Like, what crawled from the woods behind us and the creek into our garage? And I got out there, and I was looking for it, thinking maybe it would just be a large roach, because we have a lot of those, or palmetto bugs in Florida. And a crawfish, which I call a crawdad, had crawled up from the creek into our garage. And one of my daughters thought the aliens had arrived. But I tell you those two vocabulary words because on Thursday, my grandma passed away. And that is a memory that I get to hold of her, that I got to be in her trailer. Never owned a home. I don't know if any of you have been in a trailer. You probably won't see anybody living in a trailer on TV and thinking it's this luxurious life. They were just normal, common people. My grandpa worked 40 years in the same job and never took a day off, which meant he could retire for like 3 years and never have to work. But my grandpa passed away a few years ago, and my grandma passed away on Thursday. And I tell you that because just thinking through some of those memories like stirs something up inside of me. I don't know if that happens to you. And it stirs really, really good feelings, and then it stirs really, really hard feelings. Because just this morning, I was telling a story from my own childhood of an event that happened in that gully. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it was such a happy place for me, and I had been taken down into that gully where I loved to play, and something tragic happened while I was down there. And so when I think about my grandma passing away, I realize like I get to hold so much goodness with relation to my grandma because she loved everybody the same. She had 6 kids, and unfortunately 5 of them are addicted to drugs. The only one that's not is my dad. And she treated them all the same. She had a stroke, I think a couple years ago, and that's eventually what got her last week. She had another stroke. And after her first stroke, she started seeing angels. And I don't know how I feel about people seeing angels. I mean, I want to believe, then I don't want to believe. I don't know if you're like that. But she was seeing angels, and she would talk to them, and she saw them all the way through to her death. The funniest part about her seeing an angel is that one of them was hitting on her the entire time. And she loved it and called it her boyfriend. But and his name was Bob. Her husband's name was Delbert. Bob's an upgrade, if you ask me. So, I don't know what you bring into the room today, but I want to give you a message today that I think will matter to you. But I want to tell you that because I bring my own stuff into this room. I know I say it every once in a while, but today I bring stuff with me. I bring the memory of my grandma. I bring the realization of how much it hurts to lose someone. I bring the emotion of what it stirs up in my mind in relationship to people that I have come flooding back into my memory and things that I've had to deal with in my life in relationship to them. And so I bring that into the room. And I just want you to know, like, you bring your own stuff into the room. And what may happen to me today, my kids tell me not to do, but I'm going to say I can't control. They tell me not to be emotional, and I don't intend on it. But if I get emotional today, I want you to have context why. Because we're humans who live in a world where hard things happen. And I want to hold on to the good, and I have a lot of good that pulls me through life. But maybe today, as I say something, you may see me be emotional, and my kids can yell at me for it. But I want you to know if you see emotion in me, that is permission for you to feel emotion in you. I'm not trying to evoke it from you. We're not the kind of church that's like you have to cry in order to be blessed by Jesus. Like, we're not the kind of church that calls you forward in order to pray, and we have to put our hands on you and shove you to the ground and make sure that you get blessed in the Spirit, and you have to come up with the tears in your eyes. I know that God works in your life through the Spirit, and God does it the way God needs to do it for you. But what I want to give you permission today to do is to feel, because I feel, and you feel, and God's the one that brings comfort. That's sermon number one. So let's get into the message today. We're going to start a new study today that I think is relevant to everyone, I think. And it's also related to this event that we have coming up in 2 weeks. And the event is based on this question that we have as a staff, and the question we were asking ourselves is, how can we as a church help and guide parents to build healthy relationships with their athletes? And then we were asking the question, how can we help guide athletes to build healthy identities? And the reason why this question came up is because, honestly, so much of my life was spent playing sports. And so I know how significant sports plays a role in a person's development into adult life. Now, having said that, I don't want to scare anybody who hates sports. I want to start with this, though. A study shows that in our culture, in the last year, somewhere between 50 to 80%, and you can land on whichever side you want, somewhere between 50 and 80% of the people in our culture participated in at least one sport or fitness activity in the past year. 80% of you did something athletic. You may not be athletic. You may not name yourself athletic, but you have done something related to sports or fitness. Now, having said that, here's what I don't want to assume. I do not want to assume that everybody in this room cares about sports, because I know some of you don't. And I don't want to assume you want to hear about sports, because some of you don't. I also don't want to overlook the fact that some of you are not parents of athletes. And I know that some of you in this room aren't parents at all. And some of you never imagine yourself being a parent. And so what I've done is I've expanded this question of how can we guide parents toward being healthy parents in relationship to their athletes. I've expanded the idea to touch on an experience I believe is common to everybody. And I'm calling that experience the look at me effect. Look at me. That's the effect that I'm talking about. Look at me. I'm not asking you to look at me. That's the effect. And so I would argue, and this is not based on research. I did not look this up. I did not find any studies on this. This is purely based on my own experience. And so you could disagree with me, and I could be wrong. But I would argue that every single child at one point in their childhood will say to an adult, look at me. Look at me. How many of you in the room think that that's probably pretty accurate? Yeah, if you have kids, if you've ever had kids, if you've been a kid, you've said to your mom or your dad or an aunt or an uncle or somebody at church, look at me, like, look at me. And this phrase that we say when we're kids, it's usually something that we speak whenever we're at a relatively young age, like around preschool, early elementary. And typically, we speak these words as a way to get the attention of an adult, to have them watch us do something that we are far from being able to master in our life. And so, as an example, you might think of a little boy, and the little boy says to his dad, Dad, look at me. And then this little boy attempts this very awkward, semi-dangerous cartwheel. And then the little boy looks at his dad, and the little boy says, Dad, did you see me? And then, just to make sure the dad saw him, the little boy will ask, was it good? Did you see me, Dad? Like, look at me. Did you see me? And was it good? How is a parent supposed to answer that question? I mean, we can answer it honestly and be like, well, son, based on an Olympic standard of cartwheels, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say you probably could have got a gold medal. But that would be lying to your child. That would be dishonest. So you could be honest to your child and be like, based on that standard of Olympics of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, son, you were like 0.00001. Like, you could speak honestly to your child. But what I want you to think about is this. A child who has never been trained to be an Olympian in gymnastics is not looking for their parent to judge their skill. So what are they looking for? They want their parent to look at them. and delight in the fact that they are their child. And when children say, look at me, mom, look at me, dad, somewhere along the way, they have learned in order to get their mom and dad to look at them, they need to perform. It's crazy, I know. But through experiences, both subtle and severe, many of us have grown up learning that love is linked to performance. And so we have this look at me effect. Look at me, mom. Look at me, dad. The result of that idea of seeing things is that performance ends up stealing the purpose of what I'm calling our play. And suddenly, our play as young kids is no longer play. Our play is something that we do to get noticed. And so I've witnessed this with musicians at church. You all probably don't pay attention as much as I do, but it's almost always the case that when you are at a church and the service ends, there are little kids that are just itching to get on stage, man. They want on stage. And in the first place they typically want to go to, because all the other equipment is put away, are the drums. And so what you'll see is like kids are just clamoring up here to get up on the stage, and they'll just start running. They'll just start running up on stage, and eventually they're hoping I can get behind that drum set. And we've had multiple kids of different ages get behind that drum set when the service has ended, and all they want to do is just swing the sticks. Like, they don't know what they're doing, but you look at their face, they're like, they're having fun. They're just swinging the sticks, making loud noise that does not sound like music. And what I have witnessed in my experience as a church is I've seen kids go from just swinging sticks and thinking it's fun to developing actual skill. And then they get to the age where they're able to try out, if that's required of your church. They're able to try out, and they end up on the worship team. And what I have found is that those little boys and girls who were just swinging the sticks, having fun, by the time they've made it on stage and play in the worship team, that pure joy has almost completely evaporated. And all of a sudden, their time on the stage is no longer about playing for the sake of fun. They're playing for the sake of impressing you. And that's not a shame on musicians. I love our musicians. I mean, JC wouldn't be as good as he is if he didn't spend a lot of time working at it and getting good at the skill. But something about play gets lost in our life. And what I believe is that God actually designed us as human beings. I don't know if that is something that makes sense, but all of us, God has designed us to be people who crave and desire and need the freedom to be able to truly play. And the first place that we see this in the scriptures is at the very beginning in the book of Genesis. I want you to go there with me. I want you to see what I see. So go to the book of Genesis with me in chapter 1. We're going to start with verse 31. If you don't know anything about the Genesis story, it starts with creation. There are actually two tellings of the story of creation to give us more than one perspective. And so we're going to dip into the end of the first telling of the story of creation, and we see an order to it. And so I want you to hear these words. Genesis chapter 1, starting with verse 31. This is what it says. God saw everything that God made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished in all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had done, and God rested on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it, God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. I want you to notice something. We have confused ourselves a little bit in this story because we've taken the word Sabbath and rest and confused it with sleep. Or we've confused it with doing nothing. But what is happening in this text, what we see is this rest is a specific kind of rest. It's rest from work. So nobody wants to work on the seventh day. In our culture, nobody wants to work on the fifth or the sixth and seventh day. We want 2 days off. We're so fortunate that the order of creation is not something that we follow. We all work mostly, the majority of us, 5 days, and have 2 days that we don't work. But what I want you to see is it's not just a day to do nothing. The emphasis is that it's a day to stop working in order to do something else, which I think is play. So if you look at this story, God spent 6 days working on creation, and every day after God made something, God looked at it and said it was good. Like God made the light so that we could see one another, and God was like, this is good. And then God separated the land from the water, and God was like, that's good. And then God made the difference between night and day, and God said this was good. God made the sea creatures, it tells us, and God was like, it's good. And then God made the land creatures, which is not us yet, and the plants, and God made humans, and God said it was good. All that God made, according to verse 31, was very good. Y'all following me? So after God spent 6 days making everything good, God stops working. And in the absence of work, God is free to delight in and participate in creation's goodness. And so what we see here is that for God, work is really important because 6 out of 7, God worked. But we also learn that play is essential. Now, play is a really difficult word to define, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how you define play, but it's a really difficult word to define. And so what we see in this text are some key concepts that help us understand the nature of play in creation. And so what we see, and this is really important, is that in order to play, work and its demands have to come to an end. Like you can't play and work at the same time. It's impossible. I know some of you think you play at work, but you don't. You wouldn't choose to go to work if you didn't have to make money. So you really don't play at work. You cannot do them at the same time. In order to play, work and its demands have to stop. So the goal and the purpose of production is something that needs to cease in order for play to be possible. Because play and the purpose of play is actually enjoying the activity with no concept of that it can produce something that you will need to profit from. Play is separate from profit. Play is for the sake of pleasure. And God rests on the 7th day so that God can take pleasure in what God has made. Play is not for the sake of anything else than this, than to rest in the awe and wonder of what's good here in this world that God has given to us. It's your chance. Play is your chance to physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually give yourself over to an experience that brings you a taste of the joy and sweetness that exists beyond work. Thank God we have something beyond work. I know some of you do like to work, but you're also somebody who has got to be grateful that there's something sweet and good in this world that exists beyond this thing that we call labor. And so what we see in God's rhythm of work and rest in Genesis is that God gives us this gift of play. But here's the problem. Our play has become the main way that we know to earn love. I'm going to try to make sense of this for you. At a time in our lives when we're young and our emotions feel really heightened, which is what happens to us around 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, our emotions are just ramped up. And at a time when those emotions are ramped up and it feels really difficult for you on your own to know what to do with those emotions, the affirmation that comes through performance, it changes your mind. So that what happens is your play is no longer play. Your play is how you get noticed. And in being noticed, that's where you find your worth. When I was just a young boy, 5 or 6 years old, I loved playing in our family's playroom, laundry room. And it wasn't a real large room. I think it was around 15 by 15 feet, give or take. I don't know. It could have been rectangle, not completely square. But on the west side of the playroom was a wall, and that wall had a door that went to the backyard. And on that wall was all of our toys, my older sister and I, no younger brother and sister yet. All on that wall were our toys and my sister's kitchenette set. I don't know if any of you women in the room had a kitchenette set. I did not play kitchen. I played hide and seek in the kitchenette. I would take everything out, climb on the inside, and try to hide from the world. On that wall was all of that. That's the west side of the room. On the east side of the room, there were cabinets hanging on the wall, and I think some other containers to store whatever was in them. I don't know. On the south side of the room, there were large picture windows that looked out into the side yard, and you could see the house next to us. And then on the north wall was the washer and dryer, top load. I don't think at that time we had anything but top load. That was a long time ago. And on the other side of that wall was the kitchen. So there was a day when I was with my dad and we went to a basketball game, a high school basketball game. And at our high school basketball games, during halftime, the cheerleaders would throw these little miniature plastic basketballs. I don't know if that ever happened to any of you where you grew up, but the little kids would go nuts over those things. I mean, the big kids would go nuts over those things. And so the cheerleaders would take these balls and they would throw these balls out into the crowd, and they only had a limited amount. And so you felt really special if you got one of these basketballs. And my dad caught one. And he handed it to me. And I was like, God chose me for this basketball. And I knew that was going to be my basketball that I was going to play with. And so I took it home. And I don't remember what gave me the creativity, but I didn't have a basketball hoop in our house, not for this little basketball. And so my mind started turning. And I walked into the player room, and I'm looking around like, what am I going to do with this little basketball? How am I going to learn to play basketball with this little plastic basketball? And I looked at the washing machine, and it was like a bright light was shining on it. And it was like, choose me. And so I opened the lid of the washing machine, and I started acting like I'd shoot into it, and I did. And I spent hours, I'm telling you, hours and hours and hours shooting this little plastic basketball into the washing machine, pretending that I'm a really good basketball player. And I can tell you, at that moment in time, I was not anticipating or expecting any audience to come watch me do that. At that moment, I was not thinking that I would get any kind of recognition for shooting this plastic basketball into the washing machine successfully. I was not believing that I could win anything by playing this game all by myself. I can tell you, I was playing because it was fun. Do you remember playing because it was fun? Fast forward in my life 15 years, around 15 years. And one of the most emotionally pain-wrenching moments in my life happened centered around basketball. I was in college. I played college basketball, and it was my sophomore year. And it was the second college that I had attended, so it was the second team I had been on. I had already had this like breakout game where I scored 7 3-pointers in the first half, didn't miss one. Ended up with 23 points as a whole in just one half, and it was like, wow, I finally made it. And then this game occurred after that, and all of my buddies that grew up watching me play, like my biggest fans, they would show up with these signs, like thinking I was superhuman in high school, and they showed up to watch me play. And that game, I never got off the bench. And in that moment, I realized that my ability to protect my identity through sports was shattered. My friends got to look at me, and I don't know that they felt this, but I felt it, with a gaze of shame. And this thing that I came to love called basketball became something that I lost. And when I reflect back on that time in my life, where I was like superhuman in high school and everybody believed in me and they thought that I was the next Reggie Miller, even though I'm so much shorter than he is. I mean, they thought I could make a shot from anywhere, and I was short. I'm not super tall. I know I have my limitations, but everybody where I grew up thought I was it. To sitting on the bench with my friends looking at me, wondering why isn't he getting into the game. I realized looking back at that, how crushed I was by my failure to succeed at sports. Because somewhere inside of me, I had learned to internalize a voice that said, your value is attached to your performance. And if you can't perform, then you should feel deep shame. I know that sounds silly. But in my life, I had nightmares for years replaying that same scene over and over and over and over and over. And honestly, I never wanted to look at a basketball again. When I look back and I see how devastated I was by that experience, I realized that suddenly basketball for me no longer made life fun. Like the little boy who was just throwing a ball into a washing machine, I was no longer having fun. Basketball wasn't something for me that made me feel free to explore the world around me. It wasn't something that refreshed my soul from what feels like a life of work. And I think as I say that, you can imagine in your own self that same feeling. But maybe not with basketball. Maybe not even with sports. Maybe for you, you can identify with the fact when I stopped performing in a way that made people notice, I felt crushed. Maybe for you, it was art. Maybe for you, it's cooking. Maybe for you, it's dance. It could be for you that you write or you sing. But what I have recognized in my lifetime is how much I believed the lie that said, in order to hold value, in order to have worth, you have got to perform. And in your performance, you will prove who you are to other people. So I want you to listen to something. I want you to listen to what the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 11, 8 through 11 says. Let's see here. Not Leviticus. Exodus 20. Verses 8 through 11 reflects back on creation, and it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to your Lord God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. This command is to keep a day to rest from work. And why? It tells us because God did. God stopped working to play in and with the wonder of creation, and so should we. Now, what you may not be thinking about in the creation story is that God worked 6 days to make creation and God stopped working, but it never tells us that God went back to work. Have you ever thought about that in the story? God never went back to work. God made what God needed and intended to make, and God stopped working. And the reason that God stopped working is because God wanted to enjoy this good thing that God had made. Realistically, we're not supposed to work as much as we work because something happened in the order of creation when evil came in and it really messed things up. And it's stolen our ability to say, wow, there's so much good in this world that I get to play with. Most of us, we can't play with it anymore because work has stolen our play. Because you and I have been taught, and if you can't prove yourself, well, you don't have much worth. And so my argument to you today is, is nobody in this room want to steal play back? Like, I want to take it back. I want to take back what performance has stolen from play. Because just because you're an adult doesn't mean that you're not meant to play. And what I mean by that is there's a day, at least once in your week, where you are meant to look at creation and say, this is so much fun to play with. And play might be grabbing something really good to eat and delighting in it, like, wow, this tastes really good, rather than just going to a restaurant because you're hungry. Maybe you make some food together that you've never tried before, and it sounds really amazing, and you just play at making food, and you mess things up. But in the process of making food with people, you're playing, and you're saying, wow, God gave us these amazing ingredients, and we get to make it. And even if it doesn't taste good, you get to laugh at the fact that you did not do a good job making that food, even though the instructions were very clear. Are you following me? Sunday is not about taking a nap. I'm not saying you shouldn't take a nap. I mean, if you're tired, take a nap. But that's not what it's about. Rest isn't about sleeping. Rest is about saying, I'm stopping work to engage in this good that God has given me. Now, here's my concern for parents. As Christian parents, as adults in this world, we are teaching our kids that love is linked to your performance. If you do good, son, I'll look at you. But if you do bad on that field or that court, I'm going to be really upset with you. In a world where everybody's trying to get a scholarship and everybody believes they can be a professional athlete when less than 1% ever will, we've taken something that's meant to be fun and we've made it a way for you to be noticed. So mom and dads in the room, I really hope you come to the conference that we're having in 2 weeks. No matter what your kid's age is. Because sports is meant to be an opportunity for you to teach your kid how to play. And it's okay if your kid uses sports for more than that. But it will always be up to you as a parent to help your kid know what it means to have a relationship to you that is not contingent on how much playing time they get and what position they are on the team or whether or not they get a scholarship. They just need to know that you are so happy to see them play. And so what I want to give permission to all of you to do is to start playing more. I wonder what you all do on your day off. Do you really stop performing so that you can play? Here's what dads do on their day off. Here's how they perform. I gotta go mow the lawn. I gotta make my lawn look really good because anybody really cares about it, right? Like you go 1 week and your weeds got a little bit longer. You're performing. I gotta do this. Last thing, I want to challenge all of you. I want to challenge all of you to prove to the people in your life that their value has nothing to do with their performance. And here's how I challenge you to do it. By giving them continual reminders of their value just by the fact that they are God's creation. And so how I want you to think about that is that it's a delighting in the person, not delighting for your own goodness. Will you stand with me? I remember the days when that same house where I played in the laundry room, it was on top of a little hill. And we love big wheels at my home. Anybody else grew up with big wheels? I don't even know if they exist anymore. I loved a big wheel. And little kids are so brave, like slightly dumb, ignorant. But we loved the big wheel, and we lived at the top of this kind of little hill, but it was steep. And I remember what it felt like to hop on that big wheel and ride down that hill like nothing bad would happen. And I would just take that big wheel and walk it back up the hill and go right back down that hill. And when my sister got into an accident with it and started crying, we just stayed there with her for a moment, let her stop crying, carried that big wheel back up to the top of the hill and rode down again until we couldn't do it anymore. I don't know what that looks like for you in your adult life, but that's the only way you will truly rest from work, is when you allow yourself to play. Let's pray. God, I know what's true in my life, and that is, how do I know who I am apart from the things that I do to perform? Even preaching a message gets so entangled for me, and do they like what I'm saying? Do they approve of how I'm saying it? Do they want to tell me that I did good? God, it is so hard in our adult life to separate in our minds this idea that I can rest from feeling like I have to impress anyone. That there are people in this world who love me and just want to look at me, have fun. They want to look at me and give me permission to attempt something and not have to be good at it. They want to participate in the good creation that's around us, whether it's playing in the waves at the ocean or taking a bike ride around our city on the paths that we've created to do that, or if it's walking out into the yard and laying next to the pool and having a time of splashing in the water with the people that we love. I don't know what it is, God. You give us a lot of beautiful things in this creation, trails to walk on, places to look at. You give us beautiful people. You give us such beautiful people to be able to say, wow, it's fun to just have a conversation and begin to let our brains go to places where maybe we can have an imagination and be able to laugh about the things we can imagine. God, you gave some of us the ability to love food and to make good things with food. And we should be able and free to be able to do that in a way that says it doesn't matter if the people who ate it praise me. It's just the fact that I did it and it was fun. So God, today, I want to challenge our church to be the kind of people who free one another from saying, I need to perform in order to impress you. We just need to be the kind of people that say, I love you because you're human. You matter because you're God's creation, and God made you good. And I will delight in that, and I will play with that, and I will be in awe of who God made you to be in this world. And together, we can do some really fun things together in this world, because 6 days of the week, it really feels like work. So God, help us be people who don't have to say, look at me. But help us be people who know that you always have your eyes on us. In your name we pray. Amen. Let's take